Hello and welcome. I'm Chris McManus from McManus Asset Finance. This is your business finance partner, a regular check-in where we talk through what's really going on in your business, how finance can support it, and what to watch out for along the way. Let's get into it. Welcome back. This is Chris McManus and this is your business finance partner. In this week's episode, I want to talk to you about something slightly different. And this is a problem that I've seen with a number of clients over the last few years. And I'll tell you a couple of stories of the clients' situations that I found them in. So this probably isn't something you've really sat down and thought about in detail because most businesses don't. But VAT can quietly become one of the most expensive problems in a business if you don't handle it properly. And I don't mean just the VAT payment itself. You know you have to pay it. What I mean is what sits around it, the timing of the payment, the pressure that it can cause and penalties that can apply if you don't pay it on time, the knock-on effect it has on everything else. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because of these meetings I've had with clients, and I think you're going to be shocked. So one customer in particular, managing director of a construction business, very good business, not struggling at all, profitable, but like a lot of construction firms, cash flow can be a bit wobbly, a bit uneven. And we were just talking about how last year had gone. And he said that they'd had a tough patch with HMRC. So you hear that a lot. So I said, what's happened? And he said they'd been late on their VAT payments. But it was the way he said they were late. It wasn't that they'd ignored it or it had drifted, but they'd literally been 2 or 3 days late, not paying it on the 7th of the month when it fell due, maybe on the 10th, maybe on the 11th, something like that. And it was only a few days late every time. And this few days late thing really stuck with me. And I thought, well, that doesn't sound too bad. This probably happens a lot. Because, in the real world, payments don't always land when you want them to or expect them to. You might be waiting on a supplier to pay you and it doesn't quite land on the day they said, but you've still got wages to pay. You've still got fuel to pay, suppliers. And you're going to make a decision. You're going to make a call. So you think, right, we'll get everything that we have to do done and we'll settle the VAT in a couple of days when everything settles down. And you can do that once or twice. It's not going to be a big problem. But as the conversation went on, he sort of expanded on it and said, look, this has happened a few times over the last few years. And he sort of said, look, it happened about 12 times. We always paid it, but it was a few days late on about 12 occasions. So eventually HMRC come knocking and the VAT man comes. And at that point, that's when the problem starts, because for late payment, they're going to apply a surcharge penalty. And so after reviewing it, they said, we're going to apply a penalty of 25 grand per late payment. And he'd been late 12 times. So that's 300 grand in penalties for being a few days late on a number of occasions. And they gave him 12 months to clear it. And to be fair, when we were sat down, he'd literally just finished his last payment. He'd brought it all up to date and he was back up to date with everything, but he said it was absolutely brutal. And, I was sat there and honestly, I couldn't quite believe it. It's not the sort of situation you expect. And for such a small error, for want of a better word, you just think that's a hell of a thing to have to go through. Because it didn't sound like he was doing anything particularly wrong. He's always paid, just a little late. And it sounded normal. And that was the uncomfortable bit. It's exactly how lots of business operate when cash flow's a bit tight or a bit unpredictable. And as I was sat there, it really clicked with me because this wasn't something I'd come across very often. So I reached out to our clients and I said, there's a solution to this. Is this something that you've ever struggled with? And the response was, blew me away, really. We just had dozens of people saying, I need to know about this. I need to know about a solution to this problem. Businesses just think we can pay it in a few days and it's not unreasonable. It's not an unreasonable decision to think that HMRC will show some latitude, and they have done, and they can do. And once or twice, not a major problem, but they look at behaviour over time. And if it starts to look like a pattern, then they escalate, and then it can escalate really quickly. And then a little while later, I met another client, and it was off the back of this outreach that suddenly I saw another problem. And this was a client that had much bigger numbers. Their VAT bill each quarter was £500,000, and they'd got themselves into a bind, and they were in a position where they were constantly paying HMRC late, and they were being forced to accept a surcharge penalty of 15% of their liability. And so for each quarterly VAT payment of roughly £500,000, they were getting a penalty of 75 grand for late payment, £300,000 a year, every year. Absolutely insane. And so people just accepting this, they didn't seem to know there was a solution or a way out of this situation they'd got themselves into. That's just how it was. And I thought, God, this doesn't need to be happening. This, there are solutions out there, but people just don't know about it. And the solution to these problems, and if you've ever been in this situation as well, where your VAT is due and you just don't quite have the money to cover it yet, or you're just going to be tight for cash flow when you do pay it, the solution you're looking for has been out there for a while, but most businesses still haven't heard about it. And it's a VAT loan. A VAT loan product is a super simple, short-term business loan that's designed around paying your VAT bill on time and giving you time to clear that over a simple 3-month payment cycle. So we sat down, we looked at it properly, and the conversation was actually very simple. Instead of them losing £75,000 every quarter in surcharges, we said, what does it cost to fund the VAT properly and just remove that risk altogether? So we run some numbers and we got them a VAT loan agreed. It wasn't simple, but we got it agreed. And the cost of the facility over 3 months was about £20,000, roughly. Straight away, you're looking at a difference of 20,000 or 75 grand. And that's, over £200,000 a year they're saving just by having a VAT loan in place and getting themselves sorted and brought up to date with HMRC. And the other thing was, of course, they weren't having to find that whole £500,000 straight away. They could spread that over 3 months. So cash flow improved dramatically. Their costs went through the floor. And, their reaction was unreal. It wasn't relief. It was just almost confusion. Why haven't we been doing this already? And they were all looking at each other, but nobody knew it was there. No one had sat down with them and told them about this product that was out there in the marketplace that could have saved them all this money. And that's the bit that kept coming back, because it isn't a complicated product. It's just not something that businesses hear about or gets talked about in the right way. Because when you hear VAT loan, people think, well, until there's a problem, they assume the only option is to pick up the phone to HMRC and see if you can arrange a time to pay arrangement with them. And, in some cases, that's fine. It's a perfectly fine route, but not always. And they're not going to always do it repeatedly, especially if, this business is sound. Because the key point in both of these stories, these weren't failing businesses. They were trading, they were growing, they were doing deals, but their VAT timing was just off. And that small gap, turned into a really, really expensive problem for them. So when I talk about VAT loans now, I don't position them as a solution to a crisis, because they can be, but that's not when most businesses use them. They're the tool you use to avoid being in that situation ever, because your VAT's coming. You always do. You're on a quarterly cycle, 7th of that month when it's due, that's when you need to pay it. And you also know your cash flow isn't always going to line up perfectly, because having dealt with hundreds of businesses, thousands now, the stories are the same. There's always something that will go wrong, and then you're in a panic because you haven't got a plan. But having a VAT loan facility in your back pocket, ready to call on when you need it, that gives you a completely different mindset, because you're not just sitting there a week before your deadline's due thinking, I don't know how I'm going to pay this. Who do I not pay? Where do I draw money from? Am I robbing Peter to pay Paul? You've already got a plan that is going to sort this for you and going to help you push through to the next quarter. And that just removes so much pressure from your business and from your head, because a lot of what we do as business owners is upstairs. It's in our heads, and it's the relief of not having that burden is incredible. I've seen it with so many of our clients. But a VAT loan isn't something you should always use if you don't need it. All right? This is something that is there, that we can help you with, that we can have in place as a contingency for you as and when. If you need it all the time, there's other types of funding that might be better. But used at the right time, in the right way, it can save you from exactly the kind of situations I've just talked about. But more than that, it lets you run the business without that constant background stress. Have we got enough to pay for that? Because once that starts creeping in, it'll affect all your other decisions. You'll start holding back, delaying things, putting things off. You might not go for that contract that could be the next step up for you, or because your VAT bill, which is already coming. So I think the real thing I want you to take away from this episode is really simple. It's not about the product. It's about being aware that it's there. Because when you understand how quickly small delays can turn into really large costs, you start looking at VAT very differently. And in both of these cases, £300,000 penalty in one, 75,000 a quarter for the other one. None of that needed to happen. It was absolutely avoidable. They just weren't approached in a structured way early enough. And more importantly, no one ever told them these products were there. No one had ever said, have you heard of VAT loans? Do you know there's a product out there that can pay your VAT bill when it falls due on time, so you never have a late payment with HMRC? Because if you catch it early, it's a straightforward conversation. And if you leave it too long, it can become a much, much harder one. If you're interested in learning more about VAT loans, please get in touch with us. You can get us on 0330 027 0433, or you can email info@macmanus.finance. We'd be delighted to talk you through your options, put some quotations together for you, and see if a VAT loan could be a perfect solution to help you manage your quarterly VAT liabilities. That's it for this episode. I've been Chris McManus, your business finance partner. Look forward to catching you up on the next episode. Cheers. This has been your business finance partner with Chris McManus. If you're a UK business owner and would like to discuss your business finance options, please call us on 03300 270433 or email info@macmanus.finance.